Right, we're rolling. All right, good afternoon, everyone. On this beautiful, towards the end of summer day, we are going to have ancient foods and healing traditions today with Elena. So, Elena, I turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I thought that this would be a fun topic kind of as we approach the end of summer and we kind of come to like the harvest season. So we like the September full moon is always the harvest moon. So it's just kind of a time of year where lots of things are growing and um, just a lot of kind of plants coming up and all sorts of fun things happening outdoors with the weather starting to get a little less humid, a little cooler. Um, so I wanted to first get started with a couple of our recipes because they are going to take a little time to cook. So I'm first starting with the carrots. And we are going to just roast the carrots for about 30 minutes, and then I'm going to add a glaze to it, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But I just want to get my carrots going. And probably not an ancient way to consume carrots in the baby carrot form, but they're very easy when you're roasting them to use baby carrots. So I'm going to put a bag of baby carrots on this tray. I'm actually not putting any oil with this because it doesn't really need it all the time. And we are going to be adding a little bit of healthy fat through the glaze. So I'm going to just put this in the oven and just get that started. I have it at 390. You could put it a little higher at 400, but I kind of wanted it. So I'm going to put the muffins in too. I didn't want it to get too hot for them. Great. So I'm going to set my timer for 30 minutes. And then once that's in for a little while, we're going to add the glaze on and then let it just cook a little bit longer. Great. So now I'm going to get started on our muffins. And I really love these. So it's kind of like a play on a bran muffin, but to me with a lot more flavor. So we're doing flaxseed muffins, and I'm going to talk more about flax seeds when we do the PowerPoint, but they are amazing. There's a lot of good research on flax seeds. They provide really good omega-3 fatty acids for us, and they're a really nice way to kind of just add fiber to the diet. So we're going to use ground flaxseed and whole wheat flour for this recipe. So I'm going to start with the dry ingredients first. So let me get my measuring cup out. So we're going to do a cup of whole wheat flour. And what's interesting is like if you did 2 cups of whole wheat flour and this muffin, you'd really notice it like if you didn't have the flax. But I feel like the flax really helped kind of lighten it up a little bit. I'm doing a cup of flour. And then a cup of the ground flax seeds. So we use flax seeds that are ground just because if you've ever seen a whole flaxseed, right, they're small, they're flat. We really can't break them down with our teeth. But once they're ground, we're going to get all that nutrition out of it and our bodies are going to utilize it. And I tend to keep mine in the fridge after I'm buying it milled or ground. I keep it in the fridge or the freezer just because that does extend the life of it a little bit. It doesn't go rancid quite as fast. So we're going to do a cup of the ground flax seeds. Great. Then we're going to do some baking soda and some baking powder. So we'll do a teaspoon of baking soda. And then we'll do 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. Now, if you're looking to cut sodium in recipes, baking powder actually has an interestingly high amount of sodium in it. So that's always something to kind of think about if you're trying to figure out. Actually, it's not too high, so about 35 milligrams. I think the app that I use to analyze it just tells me that there's more sodium in it than this really has. So I'll have to check on that. Maybe some brands are different. So we're going to do 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. Just going to give this a stir. Just mix that up. To make sure the baking powder is all mixed up because sometimes that clumps up a little bit. All right, we'll set that to the side. And now we're going to start with our wet ingredients. So I'm going to first start with my eggs. So I'm going to beat 2 eggs or whisk 2 eggs. And it's funny, I was kind of like, oh, should I use flax eggs for this? But I'm like, I'm using so much flax anyway that I was like, I'll just use regular eggs. But you can use flax. Make the flax egg or the chia seed egg. And that's basically 1 tablespoon of egg to 3 tablespoons, or 1 tablespoon of either ground flax or ground chia to 3 tablespoons of water. And then you just let it sit. I think we've done that before in one of our classes. All right, so let me just whisk our eggs a little bit. Okay, we're gonna add some milk. So a 1/2 cup of milk. And you could use any kind, you could use, I used 1%. You can use soy milk, almond milk, whatever you'd like. Just basically needing that liquid. And then we're gonna add in a 1/4 cup of avocado oil. You don't have to use avocado oil. You could certainly use canola oil. But I did kind of want to use it just because I think people are hearing a lot about avocado oil and it's nice. It's a little more, definitely a little more expensive, so using it a little more sparingly. But it does have, you know, using olive oil can be tricky sometimes, like in baking, you can taste it, so this is a more mild flavored oil, but still has that good fat breakdown, more of that monounsaturated fat that we find to be beneficial for heart health. And then we're going to do our vanilla extract. So I'm going to do a teaspoon of vanilla extract. We're going to do a 1/2 cup of unsweetened applesauce. And this is just a really easy way to do that, kind of pre-measured already in this little cup. Although it's certainly the time of year where we can be making our own applesauce, right? Like with the fresh apples that are coming out. All right, and then we're going to do 3 tablespoons of maple syrup. So that's all the sweetener that will be in this is the 3 tablespoons of maple syrup. So, if you're familiar with muffin recipes, oftentimes they call for like a cup of sugar or something like that. So 3 tablespoons. So it ends up roughly being about 3-ish grams of added sugar per muffin, which is very reasonable. And there's a ton of fiber, which really helps balance it out as well. All right. We have all our liquids. So let's whisk that. And you can see like with this recipe that they have 4 grams of fiber per muffin. So they're really nice in fiber and 5 grams of protein. You could always use a little less oil too if you're looking to kind of reduce the fat a little bit, because it's a little higher with the 9 grams of fat, but it's certainly is, still a reasonable amount compared to like other muffins. I have like something flying around here. All right, so we're gonna slowly fold in our flour mixture and flax mixture into this. And what we're going to do is just basically with muffins, you want to just fold it in until it's absorbed. So you don't, or until it's combined. You don't want it to be like beaten with a mixer. Okay. All right. And then we're going to just mix that. So just until it's combined. Now we're going to add in our blueberries. So we're going to do 1.5 cups of blueberries. All right, and let's do that real quick. Add these in. It's a great time of year for blueberries, right? They are very much in season. Coming to the end though. Probably at the end down by you guys. All right, so we're gonna do 1.5 cups of blueberries. And you can use any berry, if you prefer. Um, you prefer raspberries or, any type of fruit, peaches, even apples. All of those would be good. All right, so we're just gonna mix this up. Very yummy batter. Not that I'm gonna eat it because it has raw eggs in it, but it's a really nice texture. Great, and then we're going to just spoon this into our muffin tin. So each one of these will have a little over a tablespoon of ground flax seeds in them. So it's a really great way to kind of hit that ground flax seed intake for the day. A lot of the research studies show it's beneficial at about 1 to 2 tablespoons a day. So we don't need to overdo it, but this amount is perfect. And for people that are, maybe going through a period where they're needing a little bit more protein, you could sub out some of the whole wheat flour for a little bit of protein powder. So maybe like a little bit of a whey protein powder, just to kind of boost up the protein a little bit. Things like this can be a nice way to get it in. And, muffins are great in terms of just something easy to grab if you're going out for appointments. They freeze well. So if it's just you at home and you're making this, you can freeze some of them. They're just a really versatile food and we can make them really good and beneficial for us. So I'm going to throw this in the oven for about 20 minutes. We'll check on it and then we'll see if it's done. Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, so hi, I'm Caroline Takasins, and I my question is about the adding protein powder to a baked good. Does anything happen to the protein when you bake it, or does it retain its nutritional qualities the same way as if you were just adding it to a smoothie?
Yeah, it would retain it the same way. Yeah, it would be fine. It'll still have that same amount of protein in it, after it's cooked. Good question though. But yeah, it's kind of nice, like I said, if people are needing a little bit more, having it, putting it in things like this can help. And I wouldn't sub it one for one. I'd probably do like a quarter cup of whey protein powder and then 3/4 of a cup of your whole wheat flour.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. And so if you bake it or cook it, the protein powder still it doesn't turn into like something toxic or whatever. Like it
No,
stays
not that
fine.
I've
Okay.
seen. I mean,
Yeah. Thank
yeah,
you.
sure. Great. Good questions. Okay. So now I'm going to make the miso glaze. So if you haven't used miso before, I wanted to kind of show you what it looked like. So this is a white miso paste. Oh wow, it's best before 2023. I didn't realize that. I was like, it's been a while since I've been to Trader Joe's and it was in my fridge, but it's tasted fine, so I'm gonna go with it. But I'd recommend, getting it new rather than using a 2-year-old one. But yeah, so this is a fermented soybean paste, and this imparts that. So we have 5 flavors, right? So we have sweet, salty, sour, and bitter, and then we have umami. So that's that fifth flavor that's like that savory flavor. So that's kind of what is found in soy sauce and that flavor profile: soy sauce, nutritional yeast, actually like mushrooms, and then this miso paste is another option, another one of these umami flavor profiles. So again, it just kind of adds some of that savory flavor, but we're using it today because it is, it's been around for thousands of years. It's, we'll talk more about fermentation, but fermentation was a way to preserve food. And this is one that, people have used for a long time. Does have the probiotics in it, like any fermented food does, but that's very timely that we talked about the protein in cooking, because when we do cook foods that have probiotics in them, they are killed off. So that good bacteria is killed off when we cook it. So what we're doing with this today is we're going to do half of what we make as a glaze, and then the other half we'll drizzle on at the end. So we still, we get some of those benefits of cooking, and then we also have some of those probiotics maintained in the product. So we're going to do this right now. Let me pull up the rest of this recipe. So we're going to do a tablespoon of miso paste. We're going to do a half teaspoon of honey. So that'll just give it a little bit of a sweetness, obviously not adding a whole lot of, sugar to it, but it'll give it a little bit of like a sweet kick. And then we're going to do a half teaspoon of sesame oil. So sesame oil is great if you haven't used it before. You just need a tiny bit and it just adds such a nice flavor to things. So it's really nice for stir fries and dressings. It's important to be careful, like checking allergies, because sesame is actually an it gets made it up to that top 9 allergens now. So that was kind of new recently becoming an allergen. And then we're going to do a teaspoon of white vinegar. That just kind of helps balance it out a little bit. Great. So I'm going to stir this up. And it doesn't make a ton, this recipe. I mean, the miso paste does, again, does have a more decent amount of sodium in it. So I don't want to overdo it. But yeah, we'll put a little bit on as a little bit of a glaze, and then we'll put the rest on at the end. So I'm going to take those out. We'll give them another 10 minutes. I'm just going to give them a little stir though. They have like in there. The muffins seem to be cooking a little faster than expected, probably because of the higher temperature. That's okay. All right, I'm going to share my screen now and we'll do this and then we'll pop back out whenever we need to take stuff out of the oven. Great. I'm going to grab my mouse real quick. Can everybody see that? Yeah,
Yes, we're good.
awesome. Thank you. Didn't hear this. I was walking away when probably people were shaking their heads. All right. So let's take a peek at our slides. So, ancient diets obviously just used a lot of whole foods because that's all they had access to and incorporated those into their diets when they could, get them and have them on hand. So we have many of our whole grains, and we'll get into that a little bit more, kind of ancient grains. So some examples are barley, millet, quinoa, rice, obviously legumes. We know legumes are a big part of a lot of traditional cultures. So lentils, chickpeas, various types of beans, and then seeds and nuts. So flax, sesame seeds, walnuts, pretty much anything that's grown on trees and, that have been accessible to people over the years. Seasonal fruits and vegetables, obviously. And then, before refrigeration, there were various ways that people preserved food. So fermentation was a big one. And obviously from fermentation, we get yogurt, we get miso, we get sauerkraut. And we'll talk more about that. Soaking and sprouting, so grains and legumes, that was often part of food preparation. Stone grinding, so the mills and all of those things, obviously to make flours, and drying and salting to preserve. So, a lot of meats and fish and in those types of foods were salted and dried. So our ancient grains. So some of these you may have had, some of these you may not be familiar with. Obviously, quinoa is one that we're hearing more about, in recent years. Millet, amaranth, teff, sorghum, wild rice, oats, barley, einkorn, which is a wheat berry, farro, rye. So lots of different grains that have been able to trace their roots back to really the beginning of civilization. We find that these grains haven't been modified over time, and they, because of that, they may require less pesticides. So while they may have kind of been, selected to kind of gradually change over the years, just like Carrots didn't used to be orange, but they kind of selected the more orange looking ones until we kind of got to the actual orange carrot. So certain things like that have happened to grains over the years, but they've at least remained unchanged for hundreds of years. I did want to highlight millet. So millet's an interesting one. I think we're probably more familiar with it in bird seed than even like in cuisine, but it's actually kind of a cool grain. It's kind of a pseudo grain, so it's part like kind of a seed, kind of a grain. So it does have a little bit more protein than traditional grains. It also tends to have a little less fiber, but it also is a good source of magnesium and calcium. But it's also gluten free. So I find that to be a nice, like a nice option for maybe like a cold salad. So if you have somebody that's got celiac or can't have gluten, um, a good substitute for maybe like a farro or a barley salad or something like that, a wheat berry salad. Millet can be a good substitution. And it has, I'd say it has a little bit more of a neutral flavor than say, like quinoa kind of has a little bit more of a distinct flavor. But millet's nice, it's cheap, it's easy to come by. And, I have read that it was like a very popular food kind of when agrarian societies started to develop because they were still kind of doing some hunting and gathering and moving, but millet actually grows to food a lot faster than the other grains. So that was something that was used a lot in earlier times. And then fermentation. So really like fermentation's been around for thousands of years. Um, obviously it is how people make alcohol, preserving various foods. It can extend that shelf life of foods, improves the digestibility of them, adds variety, new flavors. And those fermented foods contain probiotics. So that good bacteria that are found in them that kind of, then go into our bodies and help to kind of populate our GI tracts with that good bacteria. So probiotics, the good bacteria, so they're those live microorganisms, and they are colonizing our gut with beneficial bacteria. So there are types of yeast, bacteria, and other microorganisms found within that kingdom of probiotics. And like I mentioned before, they do kill off when we're cooking them. So that is kind of a downfall. So sourdough bread, for example, the sourdough yeast is fermenting, or the sourdough itself is fermenting and does have that good bacteria. When we cook it, it does die, but it does some good stuff before that too. So it helps actually digest some of the gluten in the flour. So some people tolerate, not people with celiac disease. People with celiac disease just have to avoid wheat, but avoid gluten. But with people that might just have like sensitivities and things, they do tend to do pretty well with sourdough bread. So we have lots of different fermented foods available to us. Some of us may have some of them be like, may be more a part of our diets than others. But, we have our dairy, our yogurt, our kefir. Now, kefir is also, there's also kefir water, if you've ever seen that at the store. Kimchi. So kimchi, it's more of like a Korean fermented vegetable. Will have different flavors and things in it, kind of like sauerkraut, but a little different. And then we have sauerkraut. So when we're looking, I'm going to grab my sauerkraut out of the fridge. When we're looking for fermented vegetables, we want to see that they have they have the vegetable and then just water and salt as the ingredients. When they put vinegar in it, that's a sign that it's not been fermented. So that's something to look at when you're buying, like, because sometimes you can get sauerkraut like in the package, and sometimes it says vinegar. So I would just look for the one that just says like cabbage, salt, and water. And that can be something you can kind of add in and utilize a little bit here and there. If we are trying to incorporate in more probiotics from food, we want it to be fairly regular, adding in maybe something small every day. Um, so then we have, so we said tempeh. So tempeh is a fermented soy product, fermented soybean, and that's a picture of tempeh over here on the right. I like to use tempeh in like a crumble for tacos or things like that. But again, I do cook it, so you do kill off some of that good bacteria, but you're still left with like the benefits of soy and the good protein that you're finding in that as well. Sourdough bread, which we talked about, kombucha. So I like to use kombucha more as just like something to sip on a small amount of, right? So like first off, picking an appropriate vendor, like, the grocery store is a good place if you like kombucha to get it there, just because it's pasteurized and everything. And it's, even though it's pasteurized, it does still retain some of those probiotics, just like our yogurt, is as well. And then what we want to do is look at the label and find one that's lower in added sugar. So some of them have like, for one bottle, have like 20 grams of added sugar, but some of them have 4. So I think like the Synergy brand I've seen and the Giant brand, the Nature's Promise, both have about 4 grams per bottle. And then really like I only recommend, if you're gonna have it, maybe like 4 or 5 ounces at a time. There is some like a couple case studies that showed people drinking higher amounts of it. Actually, like there were a couple people that drank very high amounts and had some health issues from it. And it was also like a homemade one. So that's always, a little risky too. But usually a couple ounces, just something different to sip on, is totally fine. And, can be something enjoyable if you're looking for something different, like a different taste. Okay, so I'm just grabbing out my carrots and we're just going to do a little bit of the glaze on these. Oh, that's this already. You know what I did forget to say was I did add a little water to this when I made it before. So I did forget to add that to the recipe. I was wondering why the volume is a little less. So I would add about a couple teaspoons of water when you try this at home. And that'll just kind of help it thin out a little bit so it goes a little farther. Great. I'm gonna put this back in. Our muffins are just about done. I'm just gonna set like a 2-minute timer for those. Great. And while we're here, I'm just gonna add a tiny bit of water to this, just so when we put it on top, it'll be enough. Okay. All right. Okay. So some probiotic rich foods, how can we use them, right? So we can use tempeh as a meat substitute. We can use yogurt and kefir in smoothies or just have them as is. We might add fermented vegetables to sandwiches, tacos, wraps. We might make a dressing with miso. I will say the fermented vegetables, you like, I know you guys have a Wegmans down there now, but they have different kinds of fermented vegetables like carrots and asparagus and different things like that. So that's, those are fun things to play around with. Now, with these probiotic rich foods, I know, in the past, if you've been on, we've talked about, it's great to have the probiotics, but we also really need to focus in on those prebiotic fibers. So the prebiotic fibers are the veggies, the fruits, the beans, all those things that have that good fiber that actually is going to fuel our good bacteria in the gut. So we can dump as many probiotics as we want in, and if we don't have the fiber to support its growth, it's going to just die off. So it's really important to have those prebiotic rich fibers too. And honestly, in the past, foods that people ate definitely had more prebiotics in them than they do now because they were eating some wild foods and things that grow and things that we haven't kind of tried to selectively modify over time to make them easier to chew and all of those things. So honing in on those prebiotic fibers can be really important. And then herbs and spices, right? So humans have always used herbs and spices, and there's kind of things that say like even the very early man, they discovered fire and then they started grilling their meats inside plant leaves, and that's kind of how herbs started. So, they found different things would flavor their food differently, and just over time, we found different ways to incorporate them, both culinary reasons and then also medicinal purposes. So obviously things like turmeric has been used for a long time, garlic, ginger, there's mint, people using mint a lot of times to help with their smells, but also for, other different uses over time. So lots of cool stuff that's happened with our herbs and spices over the years. And then flax. So flax, we made our flax muffins. Flax is so cool. So flax is also, not only do we eat it, but it's been what people have made linen with for a long, long time. So the flax plant is what makes, what linen is made from. So, it's been cultivated since the beginning of civilization. Hippocrates advocated its use. A lot of early leaders advocated their people to eat flax because they knew the benefits. There was a lot, people were more concerned about their bowel movements back then. I'm finding from my reading, now people like come to me, they're like, oh, I only go once a week. I'm like, that's not good. So, it used to be more of a focus, I think, and it should kind of go back to that. Um, so it's also the best plant source of omega-3 fatty acids that we have access to, and specifically alpha-linolenic acid, ALA, also found in walnuts, so the English walnuts specifically. And, that is really, especially if we're not eating a lot of fish, it's a really acceptable way to get those omega-3 fatty acids in. And then flax can be either brown, and that's what I used in my recipe, or yellow golden. And they both have the same kind of benefits, breakdowns, everything, just different colors. I'm going to grab my muffins out now. Muffins ripped off. We're gonna check to see if they're done. Great. So the muffins are yummy and finished. So just let them cool. Great. And then other cool things about flax. So flax has both soluble and insoluble fiber. So it has both the fiber that's kind of the roughage and that's insoluble and kind of moves things through faster. And then it also has soluble. So soluble is kind of what gels up. So you picture the flax egg. If you mix the flax with water, it swells and kind of makes a gel. Um, it's good to kind of incorporate that soluble fiber in just because it does help with cholesterol. It helps with, helps with the bowel movements too. So it's nice that it has a combination of both. There's also good research on it reducing cardiovascular disease risk and also risk for breast and prostate cancers. And then it does have a laxative effect because it is, higher in fiber. So it's a nice thing to add, to boost up the fiber. People generally tolerate it pretty well. I find it works good. Obviously, like the muffins, a lot of times when you read the research studies around flax, in a diet controlled study, they're feeding their people the ground flax in baked goods, right? So they're feeding it to them in muffins, and those things are kind of easy to like hide it. They don't know it's there, but it also is still a good way to get that in. It's also, I put it in my smoothies. It works well in smoothies. Some people put it in like with their yogurt, really whatever works for you, but like more like that 1 to 2 tablespoons a day is a good range. And sometimes there's question about it with some of the post like the breast cancer medications that people might be on. There's kind of in the past, there was a little bit of mixed information on it, like the tamoxifen and similar medications. But really, when you kind of like the general consensus now with the research is that it's safe in kind of those food amounts. And if people are having kind of looser stool and really can't introduce more fiber in, you can use a little bit of like flax oil as an option. And then mushrooms. So mushrooms have been, again, a part of our kind of early days. And unfortunately, people found the ones we could eat and the ones we couldn't eat in very unfortunate ways. But we do have, many good mushrooms that we can consume now. And I think it's cool that a lot of like there's like a lot of, you guys are right down by mushroom country. And there's a lot of farmers that are kind of starting to do like the maitake and the lion's mane and all sorts of, different mushrooms that well maybe didn't used to kind of be around much, but certainly more accessible now. But, mushrooms are used for food and then also for healing purposes. So lots of cool things with mushrooms. And then traditional dairy. So dairy has been a part of a lot of traditional cultures. Some people have, there's kind of a group of people that kind of were with like their herds so much that they developed like a mutation where they can digest lactose. So some of us might be descendant from that, those people that were kind of like in Europe and so kind of sometimes more people from European heritage can digest dairy well. And then, other people, have used dairy, but in different ways, like fermented helps with the digestion. So a lot of times if people are lactose intolerant, yogurt still works reasonably well for them, kefir, the hard cheeses, since the hard cheeses are mostly kind of fat and protein, they don't really have like the lactose that like milk and ice cream have, and then butter and ghee. Again, kind of traditional dairy that, even people that don't digest lactose well can generally tolerate. Great, and then some different recipe resources. So, some of the ones we've talked about before, but then the Whole Grains Council has some really nice information on the ancient grains, some recipes for them. And then Old Ways is just, we've talked about this before, but it's, recipes from like Mediterranean diet, African heritage diet, all sorts of different kind of traditional diets. And then the Mushroom Council has some nice recipes as well. I'm going to pull out my carrots now. Let me just get back to we're going to stop sharing. Great, I'm gonna grab those out. So I have my carrots, and then again, like when you go to serve them, once they're cooler, you can drizzle some of your leftover, not expired miso paste on them. Great. Does anybody have any questions? I think that next month, I was just looking at next month. I think it's kind of like a reset, like set some, I'm sorry, now it's going. Do you see it, Erica?
Yeah, it's like reset and restore, I think is.
Yeah, reset and restore. So we'll talk about kind of the fall and, make some fall types of foods and get excited for the cozier weather coming.